grade 12 Mindsetters, welcome to today's geography show. Today we have a special revision lesson on settlements, proudly brought to you by Macmillan. We have selected highlights from lessons shown earlier in the term to help you revise. Please post your comments and questions on our Facebook page on facebook.com/learnextra or on Twitter @learnextra so we can help you with your revision. You can also download the notes for today's show from learn.mindset.co.za or click on the link on our Facebook page. Now it's time to get on with today's lesson.
If you have a look at this diagram, we have to study it carefully, right? And we have to assume that it represents a place in South Africa. We need to do that in order to answer the following questions. But before we get to the questions, let's have a closer look at the diagram. If we have a look here, we'll notice the first thing is that there's a river running through the area, or flowing through the area, and it reaches its mouth at the sea. We'll notice that there's a settlement called Bleum, and you'll notice there's a couple of buildings which seem to be grouped together. You'll notice that there's an isolated sort of farmstead in the form of Bleedale, and also that there's a linear settlement here at Balmouth. Have a look as well at the direction in which the particular map is facing. They tell us that north is there, and that's always important because they like to incorporate things like aspects into these questions. And pay very careful attention to which hemisphere your diagram is situated in. Because remember, we need to know where a north-facing slope is, where a south-facing slope is, because that influences very heavily where a settlement will choose as its site. All right, if you have a look as well, you'll notice in this region, our contour lines are very close together, so that means that the slope is probably quite steep, or it is very steep. And you'll notice in the southern part of the map, this region here, that the contours are more widely spaced, indicating that it's a more gentle slope. Remember, it's not a very good idea to build on very steep areas. You're prone to things like rock falls, landslides. On a gentle gradient, it's easier to build and it's easier to farm. You don't get so much runoff, you don't get so much erosion, or you don't get so much mass movement, which could influence your home eventually. Let's have a look at the questions. Right, the first one. What settlement pattern is evident at Bleum? If we have a look again at the map, just to refresh our memories, you'll remember that I said those buildings seem to be grouped together. So there are two words that we can use, and you must know them interchangeably because you need to be able to identify them at different times. First one is nucleated, and the second one is clustered. They both mean the same thing. Let's write that in. Right, so nucleated or clustered. And that will get you your 2 marks. Let's have a look at the next question. Give 2 advantages of this type of settlement pattern. Right. It's very important that you got the first question right, because you need to be able to distinguish between the advantages and disadvantages of both dispersed and nucleated settlements. And if you really think about them, a lot of those advantages and disadvantages are fairly logical. You could probably come up with them on your own. All right. So if you're thinking about a clustered group of buildings and the advantages that you could have living there, remember, it's not very safe to live in a small farmstead by yourself. So for reasons of security and safety, people in nucleated settlements often live close to one another. You've got a neighbor to help you. Let's say you need to go to the hospital. Let's say you have someone breaking in. You need that security. It also builds a sense of community. And in a lot of areas where we have farms, especially subsistence farming, a lot of people will cluster together so that they can share the workload of that farm. So there are quite a few advantages to living in that area. If we have a look at the other side, a dispersed settlement, you wouldn't really want to live there because of security issues, reasons. You might be far from things like services and hospitals, and you might have an increased workload, but on the other hand, you would get to keep all the profits from your farm. So it does have an upside and a downside, whether you're looking at nucleated or dispersed settlements. Let's have a look at the question again. All right. So 2 advantages: a sense of community, all right, safety in numbers, and we can also share the workload, especially if you're working on a farm. We only needed 2 there, but I've given you 3. Let's have a look at the next question. They ask us, what settlement shape is evident at Balmouth? Give a reason to support your answer. Now, unfortunately, and I know you're going to be working quickly in your exams, so you read the first part of the question and you forget to answer the second part as well. So make sure you're taking your time when you're answering these questions, because this is a really easy section to score lots of marks. So we're looking at the settlement shape, not pattern. Remember, there's a difference between pattern and shape. Pattern, nucleated or dispersed. The shape could be circular, could be crossroads, T-junction, etc. Let's have a look at the map to see which particular shape it is. Right, all the way up there again. We noticed at Balmouth that there is a road, okay, and all of our buildings are kind of gathered along that road. A road is a linear feature, so therefore the shape of the settlement must be linear. Okay, very easy. Let's write that in. Right, it's a linear shape, and the reason is the buildings, they are arranged along a linear feature, and that could be a river, but in this case it's a road. And that will get you your 2 marks, linear shape there, and the second 2 marks for explaining it properly. Let's have a look at the next question. It asks you to describe 3 factors that could have influenced the site of Bleum. Just pay careful attention to the instructions that you must follow when you're answering your questions. To describe simply means to write a simple sentence telling us about that particular site or situation, or the factors. If you're wanting to explain or discuss something, that requires a little bit more. So if you only write a phrase or a word when they ask you to discuss, they're not going to give you any marks. So you must pay careful attention to the instructions in your paper as well. So let's have a look again at the particular diagram, and then we'll answer it. Right. Let's have a look at Bleum again. So there's Bleum once more. I pointed out to you that in this particular region, the contour lines are spaced quite widely. So that means that area has a fairly flat or a uniform gradient even. And so we said earlier that it's easier to construct a building, it's easier to farm on a flat surface. So that's one thing, right? Now we also need to look at its access to roads. So here's a road over here, and there's another one right by the settlement. Generally, people are clustered around major transport networks because it's easier to get onto a main road or a highway, okay, etc. So that's the second reason. We also notice that if this is the north-facing slope, okay, well this is the north direction, it means that this particular slope is also facing north. This slope over here facing south, okay. So when we did microclimates last term, you needed to remember that in the southern hemisphere, north-facing slopes Just think about the fact that they're facing the equator where it's hotter. So north-facing slopes receive direct sunlight. So that means those slopes are going to be quite a lot warmer. And if you think about your own homes, if you have a bedroom that's facing the north, you'll notice that you get a lot of nice afternoon sunshine. It makes it nice and warm in winter. So generally people like their homes to be built on a north-facing slope, or at least to be facing north, so that they get that natural warmth without having to use heaters or fires and things like that. So the fact that it's on a north-facing slope, that's a very big factor that has influenced its position. Let's have a look at the question so we can add some answers. Right, so the first one was that there was a gentle gradient, and we're just describing it. So gentle gradient, so it's easier to build. We also said that it's close to transport networks. So it's close to roads. It's easy to access those roads. Okay? And it's also north-facing. Well, it's on a north-facing slope, which means that in the southern hemisphere, let's put that one in brackets, it's going to be warmer. So we needed 3 things. There they are. 2 marks for that one, 2 for there, and 2 for there. 6 marks, and that is a really easy question. Let's have a look at the next question. It asks us to describe the situation of Balmouth. Okay, let's just reiterate the difference between site and situation yet again, so that you can get it right in your exam. Site, actual piece of ground on which the settlement is built. Situation, where is that settlement in relation to surrounding features? Okay, so let's have a look at Balmouth and see what we can find. Right. So if we have a look at Balmouth, again, this area here, we notice that the sea is in this direction. Okay, so it seems that the coastline is along the eastern side. So if we're assuming that this is in South Africa, it means it's on the east coast. And we know that climates along the east coast are generally quite warm because of a warm ocean current. So you can even talk about climates in terms of your situation. On the east coast, warm, humid type of climate. If we have a look at other features, you'll see that it is southeast of Albert's Shack, all right? And we also know that it is northeast of Bleum. Right, so include directions when you're talking about situation. You're telling where it is in relation to surrounding features. Let's have a look at the question again. Right, so we know it's on the east coast, which I said to you is fairly warm if we're talking about South Africa. We know that it was, let me just check again, that it was to the northeast of Bleum. Northeast of Bleum. And it was to the southeast of Albert's Shack. Right, but we only needed 2 there. So there's your 2 marks there and 2 marks there. Very simple, very nice. Right, now we're going to deal with Albert's Shack. We need to discuss 3 reasons, to discuss them, to explain why Albert's Shack is not placed on a good site. Let's have a look quickly. And I've drawn a lot on here, but we can still see what's going on. Remember, I spoke about a steep gradient here. This is a south-facing slope, okay, facing the south. You'll also notice that it's quite close to the river. So there's a couple of things that would worry me if I were to build there, okay? So a steep slope, not easy to build on. You can also be prone to things like rock falls, which are dangerous. You can't really farm on a steep slope either because you're going to get so much runoff and so much soil erosion that you're not going to have a good yield. If you're on a south-facing slope, it's going to be a bit cold because in the southern hemisphere, south-facing slopes receive oblique, less direct sunlight, and it casts them in what we call a shadow zone, making it quite a bit cooler. So it's not a very good place to build your house if you're on a south-facing slope. In addition to that, it's right close to the river. And if you're right on the floodplain of that river, it means that you're very prone to flooding. So there's a couple of reasons why it's not a good site. Okay, let's go to our answer. All right, so steep slope, not a good idea. It's difficult to build on. And there's rock falls. Okay, mass movements. Right? The second one that we said was that it's a south-facing slope. You need to explain that in the southern hemisphere, south-facing slopes are generally going to be cooler. It's also on the floodplain. So that means that you're going to be very susceptible to flooding. So it's not a very good choice of site. Let's have a look at question 7. Last question. Would Bleum be considered a unifunctional or a multifunctional settlement? Remember to read the whole question. Give a reason to support your answer. All right. So remember we said unifunctional means there's only one activity going on in that settlement. Whereas if we're talking about multifunctional, it means there's lots of services. There could be lots of industries. There could be farming as well. Lots of different things, multifunctional. So if we have a look at our map again, one more time. Right. There's Bleum again. I can't see any services. There's no church there. There's no post office. There's no police station. There's no symbols indicating any other services. So we have to assume that it is unifunctional. It might be a farmland area, but unless it includes other services, it means it's unifunctional. Let's write that down. Right. Unifunctional. There are no industries or services evident, or no symbols for those services or industry present. And those are most of them are the types of questions that you can expect in an exam.
Okay guys, I hope you are enjoying this revision session. If you need help, remember to post on the page or send an email to helpdesk@learnextra.co.za. Now it's time to take a quick break, but don't go away, we'll be right back. Welcome back guys, we have some great news to pass on to you. We will be bringing you winter school from the 30th of June till the 20th of July, starting at 10 a.m. every weekday. To get the full schedule, visit our website, learn.mindset.co.za, and look for the winter school link. Join us, it's going to be a lot of fun. But now it's time to get back to the lesson.
We have a look at the first question. They give you figure 1, and it's showing the cycle of rural decay, which also occurs in the South African landscape. This often results in rural-urban migration. Remember, people leaving rural areas to move to more cities and towns, resulting in specific problems for rural areas. Let's have a look at the diagram. Fairly similar to what we looked at before, all right? So firstly, all the young, active people, they want a better lifestyle, they want more excitement, they want more entertainment, they want better jobs. They're going to leave to make a better life in the cities. The older people are left behind, and they're too old to work as hard, Okay, so they can't produce many crops, they can't handle the workload. The farmland decays and production also decreases, becomes less productive. The income per capita in rural areas is reduced, especially seeing as some of your services and shops will have to close down. And because we don't have a productive farmland anymore, many people are going to starve. Let's have a look at the questions. 1.1, and they usually start with a definition. Define the term rural-urban migration. So there's 2 free marks right there. So remember that rural-urban migration meant that people move from rural areas towards urban areas for a number of reasons. Let's write that down. So people move from rural areas, like villages, to more urban settings, right? Like cities, like towns. Full definition for 2 marks. If you only give half of it, you won't get any marks. Question 1.2. Name, so you don't have to discuss, just name 2 push factors that may result in rural-urban migration. Remember, we were talking about things like the lack of services, the lack of infrastructure. There's also a lack of entertainment in rural areas, so people choose to leave to go to the cities. They might find that natural disasters also force them to move. So luckily, this question's only for 4 marks and 2 factors, but that could possibly also be an essay question. Let's write a couple of things down. So 2 push factors, okay? The lack of service provision, right? Also, the lack of infrastructure, like decent roads, decent railway networks. All right? They could also have a lack of entertainment. All right? We could also include in that answer natural disasters like a drought or a flood, population pressure on the available resources. And there's more than enough for our 4 marks there. Let's have a look at the next question. Right, now we have to discuss 3 consequences or results of rural-urban migration for this rural community. So in your diagram that showed that cycle of rural decay, they've mentioned a few things like the old people get left behind, land becomes less productive. But when they say discuss the effects or results, you actually need to write a sentence to explain that you know what is meant by those terms. Okay, let's put a couple of things down. So firstly, we're going to have an aging population. Okay, and the reason behind that is that most of your young people, those are the ones that are going to leave. All right? Your agricultural land becomes unproductive. All right? Agricultural land is unproductive. They can't cope with the workload. Okay? Our services will decline, shops will close down, okay? Our GDP per capita will also decrease because most of the able-bodied people have gone to find work somewhere else. Shops have closed down, people are unemployed, the old people are left behind, so therefore the average earnings will decrease. So there's 4 of them for you. There are others. As long as you've explained 4, you'll be fine. If you have a look at the next question, write a single paragraph, no more than 12 lines, in which you discuss, so everything has to be in a sentence, sustainable strategies that can be used to manage South Africa's declining rural settlements. Now remember that back in apartheid laws, most of the funding or the budgets government budgets were associated with urban areas because those were white-dominated settlements. So those areas improved very rapidly, but your rural settlements, they kind of were left in the cycle of decay. And that process hasn't been quite rectified. So there's quite a few things that the governments, non-governmental organizations, privately owned companies try and do to try and uplift these rural settlements. So if you think logically, a lot of our rural towns, they've developed things like their tourism. There's lots of nature reserves in the vicinity. People like to go there, so there's lots of shops and curio shops and hotels that people will like to stay at. They try and revitalize the town, in other words. Okay? You can also attract people back into the town or into the settlement via a number of ways. Your pensioners, for example, if you build nice retirement villages in your rural settings, which are tranquil and peaceful, they are likely to want to come and live in the quiet countryside. You can also attract younger people back to your towns by creating employment opportunities. You can use various programs, rural development strategies, to help uplift the rural communities. Things like the RDP program, things like the basic needs approach, providing basic sanitation, electricity, decent infrastructure. They can improve that as well. Last year in grade 11, you guys did a concept called the Spatial Development Initiative, which actually looks at developing these rural towns as well. So you can mention all of those things in your paragraph. Let's just summarize a couple of those now. So the first thing that we said was that we can improve the tourism. Have hotels, tourist attractions. Okay. You can add or open nature reserves, okay, or game parks. You can attract pensioners back to that area. Okay, remember, if you build nice retirement villages, they are likely to come back. You can also improve skills development for your remaining population so that they are not inclined to move. We can employ initiatives like the the Rural Reconstruction and Development Program, the Spatial Development Initiative, okay, Local Agenda 21, which we looked at earlier. So if you mention all of those things, you are likely to get your marks. There are quite a few other things which you can also incorporate, and as long as they make sense, your markers, if they're logical, your markers are likely to give you the full allocation of marks. Remember, when you're writing your answers in a paragraph, you need to make sure that you don't write in point form and in full sentences so that they won't deduct any marks. Let's have a look at a couple of other questions from another example. Okay. Question 2. You need to read the article on a social justice issue in figure 2. Remember, social justice means that everyone in that community, in the country, is entitled to satisfy their basic needs. Basic needs being access to water, food, housing, sanitation, electricity. Okay, remember social justice, it will probably come up. Let's have a look at the excerpt. All right. Telling the story about South Africa's rural poor. Okay? Says here, this is a story about the Skosanas. They're interviewed by the social surveys. Until 2001, they survived relatively well on the farm. They had a tap for water. They had firewood, which is obviously their means of cooking, of warmth. Then the farm was sold to a new owner who wanted the Skosanas off the land. For 2 years, they fought eviction. After all, this was the new South Africa, free from apartheid supposedly. And for the first time, they had rights. But the farm owner shut down their water tap and ordered them to stop gathering wood on his land. Finally, The owner came early one morning when the children were still asleep, broke down the door, and threw the family's furniture and belongings onto the road. The children were afraid that they would have nowhere to sleep. Mr. Skosana was ill and could not work anymore. Okay? Mrs. Skosana says she will never forget the experience of being thrown out like rubbish, and no one deserves that. Let's have a look at the questions. First of all, that first term, explain what is meant by social justice. As we mentioned before, it means that every individual, or every person, has the right to satisfy their basic needs. And those are things like sanitation, access to electricity. All right, 1 mark for that definition. You also had to name the social justice issue from the story that it captured, and basically they were thrown off their land or denied access to housing or to a home, which is part of their basic needs, and that's not allowed. 1 mark there. Let's have a look at the next question. This is an interesting one, a little bit more interpretation here. Why is the word new emphasized in the article? Now remember, in the New South Africa, everyone is supposed to have the right to basic needs like housing, water, electricity. But in this case, even after apartheid, these people were still being treated abominably. They were thrown out their house. They were thrown off the land. And remember, there's actually laws in place that say people have the right to use that land through security of land tenure, land reform processes. They have the right to use that land for settlement and distribution. But they were, well, settlement and agriculture. But they were thrown off that land and they were evicted in a very cruel way, in a very inhumane way. Right, so even though we're referring to the new South Africa, it means that some of these issues that should have been sorted out, they're not. Okay? In the new South Africa, we still have people without access to their basic needs. So you need to get that point across in this answer. Let's write something down here. So even after apartheid, people are still being denied access or denied the right to satisfy their needs. You can put that in your own words as long as you get the point across. 2 marks for that sentence. Let's have a look at the next 2 questions. Name the law that secures the rights of people who live under insecure conditions or under insecure conditions on land owned by others. And you must call that rural land reform or rural land tenure. Okay? Or land reform tenure. Which means they are granted the right to use and live on that land. 2 marks there. Right. Let's have a look at the next question. Excluding the social justice issue, which we mentioned in question 2.2, you have to discuss 2 other social justice issues experienced in rural areas. So, in other words, what sort of problems are the people themselves in this article been facing, right? So they mentioned things like they didn't have access to decent water supplies. They had to collect firewood to do their daily cooking, for example. So they didn't really have electricity. If they didn't really have electricity, it's probably safe to assume that other services and other infrastructure are not in place. They also mentioned that Mr. Skosana didn't or couldn't get a job, or he didn't have a decent enough job, a well-paying job, so they are therefore stuck in that cycle of poverty and they are unable to earn a decent living. So we need to discuss two of those things. Let's write a few things down. All right, so firstly, they didn't have access to water or limited access to water. They also had no access or limited access to things like electricity. They probably had a lack of service delivery, like hospitals and schools. All right. And they also probably had a lack of infrastructure. And that will get you your 4 marks, but you only needed 2. Right, moving on. You need to discuss any 2 problems that the government experiences or could experience with this process of land reform. So this idea is all good and well, but there are a number of issues that obviously will arise in trying to implement this process. So obviously this process is taking time. 20 years on from the end of apartheid, we still have people struggling to gain access to land. It takes a lot of time, and there's also a huge cost involved, all right? Sometimes there's lack of support by the government. There's also disputes between owners and new tenants, and that obviously results in quite a few problems. And they also have to consider disputes between the traditional leaders and the government about how much land they are allowed to use. So there's quite a few things here. Let's just write 1 or 2 things down. Right? So firstly, it takes a long time, but too long in many cases. It also involves high cost. Right? Sometimes there's also a lack of support by the government. And there are various disputes which I've just discussed with you. Could be between the landowners that are not willing to sell or to give up their land. It could be between government and traditional leaders about the extent of land. And all of these issues take a long time to resolve.
I think it's time for a break now. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the break. Let's not waste any time and get straight back to today's revision lesson. Over to you.
Let's get on to improving your skills. Girls, I want to see how sharp you are. Then we know about your teacher. All right, let's look at this diagram. All right, it didn't come out very clear here, but this settlement is actually on a slope. All right, it's on a slope. Now, there's other areas around the settlement. I try to put in as much pictures as possible because your exemplar doesn't have as much pictures, so you can picture it down here. Okay? So we looked at here, we can see this is where the settlement is, and there is markets around it. Define the term site. Girls, let me see if you all know this. Define the term site.
The exact location where a settlement occurs.
Well done. Let's see if you're right. And I'm going to have a bit of a problem here, Loni. I always have a problem with this, to open this thing up.
You click the...
Okay, I need to erase. Sorry, learners. And I'm going to erase this. There's it here.
No, the other one, the black one, you see on top of the...
On top of the...
The pins.
Oh, yes, it's down here. All right, then I press on it. I'm going to have a problem, but anyway, I'm going to get it soon. You are right. I'm having a problem today. It is actually the exact location. I'm not
Try to
writing.
write it
The
like that.
exact location. The exact location of the site. That means where the settlement is. Learners are messing up today.
It's above the pen. Do you see the
Back of the pen.
above?
Above the pen. And
This-
I'm looking
this
for the
one.
pen. Thank you so much. Thank you, man. You see what young blood does? Today I'm losing it. So it refers to the exact location on which the settlement develops, with a few arrows in between. Please don't write the arrows. Eh? All right, let's go on. State the site factor visible in the photograph that determine the location of the settlement. What do you think would be?
The slope.
Slope aspect, learners. I'm sure you got it also because it's on the slope. And in the southern hemisphere, which slope aspect will it be?
The north
North facing. In the northern hemisphere, the south facing. Now I'm nervous. Got it. Thanks, Looney. I'm getting it again. You know, each time you have to remind me, it's age and
Okay, that's fine.
All right, let's look at the next one. Explain how the site factor, answer to question 1.2, was used to locate the settlement. And I suppose that's where our answer comes in, eh? We looked at which hemisphere we are in and which side the sun shines. And if we're in the northern hemisphere, it would be in the south-facing slope. And if we're in the southern hemisphere, it would have been the
north-facing slope.
All right, we're located on the north-facing slope. All right, the north-facing slope receives direct sunlight in the southern hemisphere. All right, southern hemisphere. Whoa, I'm really getting it now. You understand? Let's look at something else. Another question. Explain two other possible site factors that could have influenced the location of this settlement. Two other factors. Now, learners, one thing very important, okay, is that we look at the diagrams and see if we can find the possible ones there first. Okay, and I'll tell you, if you can't find it, take your chance outside. Right, but on this one here, it didn't come out very clearly, but there is a road leading out down there. Right, learners? You can see a road. All right? Also, there is a river that ran through here. Not as clear there, but you can see a river. But please, if you don't find it, learners, it said possible solutions. So you can assume. All right? But there is a road and a river here. You understand? The road leads in and it cuts through there. You understand? So, drainage could be one. Now remember I mentioned the road. And you may say to me, transport. But if the road is on the settlement, on that piece of land, and it was there, and the settlement developed after that, then it's also a site factor. So transport can be a site or a situation factor, depending if it's linking up the place or it's on the place itself. Okay, I'm going to do this one. All right, because I'm going to enjoy pressing this. Yes. There's a lot of indicated good quality of soil. Was one of them that was indicated there. All right, there's another one where we could talk about the river. So that would be water supply. And we can use transport because on this one there was a road on that exact piece of land. So transport. Okay? You all happy? Let's look at the next one. Evaluate. Learners learn these words off. Evaluate, assess. You understand? All those little things. What we're saying is, when we say evaluate, we say, is the site good or bad? And this is going to be your high order questions. You understand? Whether the site is good or bad. What do you guys think? Is the site good?
Yes, sir.
You all agree?
Yes, sir.
Okay? You're right. And I'm sure the learners out there also said it's good. Why do you think it's good?
Because there could be a marketplace around
Right?
the area.
The situation. There could be a marketplace. I'm happy that you did not state fertile soil. Because that's what learners sometimes jump to. And I didn't highlight this word. Because it deals with the situation. You understand? Situation. Which not deals with fertile soil. Fertile soil is site. So you're right, there's a marketplace. What else did we find there? If you look up here.
The transport.
Transport network linking the road, the settlement to the market. So yes, it is a good site, all right? Because it has linking to the markets, okay? And it has a market. You know, you're building something and you can't sell from a settlement? Okay, I'm not even going to bother about that one. You seem to know that already, okay? Let's go to the next one. That is not me. Maybe it's Looney, I don't know. All right? Okay, let's look at the cartoon that we have here. Because you will get cartoons also. All right? You see Frankenstein? He's walking through and he's saying, build, baby, build. I'm sure there must be some hip-hop song on that. All right? So build, baby, build. And what do you notice? There's farmlands here being crushed and the city is just developing. What concept is that?
Urban sprawl.
You understand? So your cartoons, etc., leads you on what to the examiner actually wants. All right? So if we look at this one, obviously, you'll see the scaffolding questions from define and then move down. So the examiner will start off to introduce you to the concept which you worked out already. And then he says, define the term urban sprawl. You see, Luni?
Yes,
you want to change
I
it?
was looking
you
at
press
you.
the one on top.
Yes.
You learn that, right? Hope you learn that. Then you can press here, otherwise you make yourself an embarrassment. Okay, it's the formless expansion of urban areas. It just grows, as we discussed earlier. Can you see how it's in action now? You go concept, 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 but now what we're doing is we're using it. Now watch this. State 3 problems, urban problems. Don't talk about farming. Watch out. 3 urban problems. See, you press the pen first. 3 urban problems. Because people immediately, they see the word problems, they forget about urban. You can't talk about farming problems. So what would be some of the urban problems that you guys think? Can you help me out there?
If there's a lot of traffic.
Because it's just growing, eh?
Yes,
Lots
sir.
of traffic, lots of congestion. All these things are happening. You understand? Because it's growing, because it's urban problems. But do you realize this, how sometimes how easily you can make a mistake? When you look at the word problems, let's look at it down here now. All right, traffic congestion. Get my pen working. Pollution. I've even included a way out one crime. You understand? It's another situation. I don't want to include the normal one. But you can go on and on with problems. The different types of pollution, the crime, the traffic congestion. All right. A lack of aesthetic appeal because the city is just growing. There's no more beauty left. You understand? Trees, etc. are cut down. 2.3. Explain 3 environmental impacts. Can you see the operational words? Learners, be very careful. Don't just, many of you got the habit of just reading one word, impacts, and you write everything. You understand? You write damaging people's homes and farmlands get damaged. Watch out for words. It says environmental impacts. Anybody want to help me with that?
They can destroy the vegetation in the world.
Yes, they can destroy the natural vegetation. You understand? They can damage the fauna and the flora. They can damage ecosystems. That's environmental. Can you see it, learners? It's not just impact, but it's specific. So you give answers out of that. It's actually wrong. Okay? You must stick to the main word. So let's look at the answer. Let me press my arrow. It removes vegetation to build. Removes vegetation to build an urban area. destroys the ecosystems and the food chains. Look at this. Increases runoff, resulting in more soil erosion. That's an environmental impact. You're removing fertility of soil. Can you see what we're also doing here? We sort of including our geomorphology, to a certain extent our climate. You understand? So don't learn in isolation, learners. Pick up everything and go through it. Okay? Because you see them together and try and fix like aspect of slope was climate. Am I right, guys? So you pick up various aspects. Discuss possible solutions to urban sprawl. What could we do? What could we do, guys?
Replanting.
Yeah.
The green belt, eh? Please, green belt is not karate. It's a green belt where you're leaving vegetation, conservation areas. Because soon, if you leave urban sprawl, learners, the cities will meet. I mean, you don't want that. You understand? We don't want to be have Pretoria with us and damage all the vegetation. Not that we don't like Pretoria. You understand? So these are problems. So one of the biggest things, and you're correct, is that we develop green belt areas. Okay? Declare conservation sites. That's natural. It stays natural. All right. Planting vegetation in areas. All right. Develop green belt and planting may be same. Revegetating. All right. Or remaining and keeping the vegetation as it was.
We've come to the end of today's show. Thanks for joining me and for chatting to me during the show. Remember to visit our website, learn.mindset.co.za, to get the notes and to watch the videos from the term. Goodbye.